It's a cold, gray morning in 1944. The air is thick with tension as Japanese women POWs are herded into the stark, makeshift camp in the Philippines. The crackle of radios and the clatter of boots on gravel reverberate through the camp's narrow pathways. For months they've been subjected to harsh conditions, their once pristine uniforms now ragged and stained. Hunger and exhaustion have become their constant companions. Yet today something is different. As the women shuffle into a rudimentary open-air shower area, the sounds of the camp fall away. They are ushered forward by a camp officer, who in a near unbelievable gesture motions them toward a metal tank. Steam rises gently from the spout. For a moment they stare in disbelief. Hot water. They've been denied even the most basic comforts for so long, and this small act of generosity feels like an impossible luxury. The world was locked in a brutal and unforgiving war. By 1944, the Axis powers were reeling from a series of defeats, but Japan, despite its declining position, maintained a fierce resolve. Its empire, once stretching across vast territories, was now under siege by the combined might of the Allied forces. In the Pacific, the Allies' island-hopping strategy was bringing them closer to Japan's doorstep, while the Japanese military clung to its deeply ingrained warrior code, pushing for victory even in the face of inevitable defeat. As the war dragged on, it was no longer just the soldiers who bore the weight of the conflict. Civilians, including women, were caught in the crossfire. In occupied territories like China, Korea, and the Philippines, Japanese soldiers were capturing not only men but women as well. Many of these women were forced into labor camps, where they faced unimaginable hardship. Some were captured by the Allies during raids, others during the fall of islands and cities under Japanese control. These women, mostly civilians, were subjected to the brutalities of war in ways few could have anticipated. While the men fought on the front lines, the women were often relegated to non-combatant roles until they became POWs. These women were far removed from the grand strategies of war, but became pawns in a larger geopolitical struggle. In Allied camps, the situation was no better. While soldiers of all nations faced starvation and disease, the women POWs experienced a level of degradation and humiliation that was hard to imagine. In these camps, basic needs like food, shelter, and dignity were in short supply. But in a world defined by cruelty, sometimes there were moments like the one to come that offered a glimpse of humanity amid the chaos. The treatment of prisoners of war during World War II varied greatly depending on the captors and the location of the camps. While some of the Axis powers followed brutal, inhumane policies, others, particularly the Allies, adhered to the Geneva Conventions, though adherence was not always consistent. The psychological toll of captivity was immeasurable, especially for women, who found themselves at the mercy of enemy forces in situations that were beyond their control. For the Japanese women who were captured, the experience was harrowing. Many had been forced into labor camps during the early stages of the war. They were often subjected to long hours of work, inadequate food, and harsh treatment from Japanese officers, who in the context of war, saw women as tools for survival, not human beings to be protected. When these women were taken as POWs by the Allies, their fates didn't necessarily improve. The Japanese had long adhered to a strict code of conduct that placed an emphasis on discipline and self-sacrifice, even among civilians. This often made them reluctant to surrender, and those who were captured often faced severe physical and emotional trauma. Upon their capture, many of these women were placed in camps where conditions were poor, yet their captors did not engage in the systematic cruelty that the Japanese had shown to their own prisoners. While Allied forces were not perfect, the care given to POWs, especially by Western forces, was often more humanitarian. But these women, like others in such dire circumstances, lived in fear of what might come next. Yet the moment of being offered something as simple as hot water for a shower seemed unfathomable to these women. After months of deprivation and the trauma of captivity, it was an act that challenged their worldview. To be given such an intimate comfort, something they had never expected, felt like a gift from another world. It was this act that opened the door to a much-needed shift in perspective, both for the women POWs and the soldiers who oversaw their captivity. The Japanese women. POWs were not just soldiers' wives or daughters. They were individuals with hopes, dreams, and lives that had been irreversibly altered by the war. Many of these women had been thrust into the horrors of conflict, often as laborers or nurses in the Japanese military, and now found themselves prisoners in foreign lands. The human toll on these women cannot be overstated. These women, though prisoners, still carried with them the remnants of their former lives, memories of normality that seemed increasingly out of reach. The shock of captivity was compounded by the deep emotional scars left by years of relentless warfare. They had witnessed the destruction of their homes, the death of family members, and the collapse of a way of life they had once known. In many cases, they had never even dreamed they would end up as POWs. And the shock was often overwhelming. But beyond the physical suffering, it was the emotional strain that was perhaps the most difficult to bear. The indignity of being captured, the loss of control over their bodies and lives, and the separation from loved ones were sources of constant pain. The generosity they experienced in that moment, hot water for a shower, felt like an unexpected salve to the wounds that ran deeper than the physical ones. From a tactical and leadership standpoint, the management of POW camps was a delicate balancing act. The Allied forces, although victorious, were faced with the immense task of handling the large number of prisoners, including women, who had been taken during various campaigns. The Geneva Conventions provided some structure to how POWs were to be treated, but the implementation of these rules was inconsistent, particularly when resources were scarce, and the war was nearing its conclusion. Allied commanders knew that the treatment of POWs had a significant psychological and moral impact, not just on the prisoners themselves, but on their own soldiers and the international community. By 1944, after years of brutal fighting, the Allies had seen the Japanese cruelty toward prisoners, including civilians, and were determined to take the higher road. The generosity shown by the Allied forces to these Japanese women POWs, particularly in the form of providing them with hot water for showers, was a rare act of compassion in the midst of a brutal war. This moment wasn't just about providing a basic comfort, it was about the subtle power dynamics of captivity. The act of kindness was a reminder of the humanity that even soldiers could retain, despite the violence of the larger war. This unexpected gesture showed that, despite the enmity between the nations, the captors still had the capacity for empathy. Military leaders understood that keeping POWs' morale in check was vital for maintaining order within the camp, and sometimes a simple act like this could foster a sense of goodwill, even in the most difficult circumstances. It was an ordinary morning in a place where routine had been defined by survival. The sound of footsteps on gravel, the creaking of gates opening, and the distant calls of officers, all these had become part of the backdrop of the POW camp. But on this particular day, the usual routine was shattered by something unexpected. As the Japanese women POWs were led toward the shower area, they saw the familiar sight of metal pipes, but this time something was different. The air around them seemed warmer, the usual coldness replaced by a surprising comfort. The camp officers gestured toward the shower stalls, where hot water was flowing, something that had been unimaginable for the women who had long suffered in the cold, the heat, and the filth. The women paused, momentarily unsure whether this was some sort of cruel joke. Hot water. It seemed like a luxury that was as foreign to them as the idea of a peaceful world. Their minds raced as they processed what they were seeing. For months, they had endured harsh conditions, their bodies bruised and battered. And now, something as simple as hot water, something they might have once taken for granted, was offered to them as a sign of care and perhaps even respect. The officers, with an almost apologetic gesture, motioned for them to go ahead. They hesitated at first, as if afraid that something would go wrong. But as they stepped under the stream of warm water, there was a collective exhale. A moment of disbelief. A moment where the walls between captor and prisoner seemed to melt, just for an instant. The hot water was a small luxury, but in that brief moment it was something far more profound. It was a rare acknowledgement of their humanity. A reminder that despite the brutality of war, some acts of kindness could still be extended. The immediate effects of the hot water were more than just physical. They were deeply psychological. For the women POWs, the shower was not simply a chance to cleanse themselves of dirt and grime. It was a moment of catharsis, an emotional release that many had not allowed themselves to feel in months, if not years. The harsh realities of captivity had dulled their senses to the comforts of life, but the hot water forced them to confront the stark contrast between their current suffering and the normalcy they had once known. It was a small act, but it carried a powerful message. You are not just prisoners. You are human beings, and we see you. The warmth of the water seemed to symbolize a sliver of care that transcended the military conflict surrounding them. It was an act that defied the expectations of war, where cruelty and inhumanity were often the norm, and offered instead a rare, fragile glimpse of empathy. For the captors, too, the act had an impact. They had witnessed the horrors of war, the suffering inflicted by both sides, and the deep divisions between nations. But in that moment, as they watched the women tentatively step into the shower, they were reminded of the shared humanity that connected them all. There was no grand speech, no declaration of peace. Instead, it was an unspoken gesture, simple yet profound. And for the women, the significance of that moment lingered long after they had dried off and returned to their daily routines in the camp. It was more than just a warm shower. It was a flicker of light in a world that had been consumed by darkness. It was a reminder that even in the worst of times, there could be moments of grace, of decency. The Japanese women, POWs, who had spent months in the brutal environment of the camp, slowly came to terms with the shock of the shower. For some, it was an immediate and profound realization that the war's cruelty had not stripped them of their humanity, or that of their captors. The small gesture of offering hot water was like a seed planted in their minds, challenging their understanding of what was possible in the midst of war. The women, though still in captivity, began to see their captors in a different light. This simple act of kindness, though fleeting, sowed the seeds of a complicated, conflicted understanding. They were, after all, soldiers, enemies. But the gesture suggested something more, something unexpected. Some of the women began to whisper to one another, unsure of what to make of the act, but all of them recognized that it had been a departure from the norm. It was something that made them feel less like animals and more like people again, if only for a moment. The officers, too, were changed by the experience. The men who stood guard, the ones who had administered the orders, saw the women with different eyes after that day. The act of giving them hot water was small in the grand scheme of the war, but its reverberations were felt within the camp. Those moments of humanity were brief, but they served as reminders that war's brutality did not have to completely strip away empathy. For the women, this realization came with mixed emotions, a sense of disbelief followed by a hesitant appreciation. They were still prisoners, still in a state of suffering, but they now held within them a new understanding of the complexities of war and the people who fought it. The ripple effect of this seemingly small act of kindness did not go unnoticed. Though the immediate change in the camp was subtle, the broader impact on the treatment of POWs, particularly women, began to manifest over time. Allies had already implemented some elements of the Geneva Conventions when it came to the treatment of prisoners. But the way this particular camp handled its captives created a new precedent in the minds of officers and commanders. In the aftermath of World War II, the handling of POWs, especially women, became a topic of reflection. This single act, providing hot water for a shower, was a reminder that war, though cruel and unforgiving, could also allow for the smallest sparks of kindness that bridged the gap between enemies. Post-war, the treatment of POWs was scrutinized more closely. Governments and military leaders began to consider not only the military strategies, but the human cost of conflict. The events of the war led to the development of better policies on POW treatment and the push for international humanitarian law that sought to protect prisoners of all nations. For the women POWs, the event marked a small victory in their otherwise harsh existence. It was a reminder that their humanity had not been completely erased by the horrors of war. It shifted their perception, and some of them, when they returned to Japan after the war, spoke of their experiences in the camp, not only of the suffering but also of the brief moments of grace, like the hot water shower that had left a lasting impact on them. On a larger scale, the moment highlighted the complexities of wartime morality. While one act of kindness could not undo the damage done during the war, it showed that even in the darkest of times there could be moments where decency triumphed, however fleeting. The event of the hot water shower stands as a poignant reminder that humanity can endure even in the bleakest of circumstances. For the Japanese women POWs, It was a brief, unexpected moment of warmth in a world ravaged by violence and loss. In a war defined by cruelty, this act became a symbol of the complexity of human nature. That even in captivity, and even under the harshest of conditions, there is still room for empathy. This moment challenges us to think about the morality of war and the power of small acts of kindness. It reminds us that, despite the devastation, individuals have the capacity to make decisions that transcend their roles as soldiers or enemies. In that single instance, the captors demonstrated that, even in a time of unrelenting violence, they could still offer a simple, human comfort. While the war left deep scars on all who experienced it, the hot water shower serves as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. For the women, it was more than just a comfort. It was a symbol that their dignity had not been entirely lost. And for the soldiers, it was a fleeting reminder that the horrors of war did not entirely extinguish the possibility of compassion. Ultimately, moments like these serve as a critical reflection on the complexities of war, where both cruelty and kindness coexist, often in the most unexpected ways.